Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is the story of the issues I've had with the Bambu P1S and how I troubleshooted those issues. Is troubleshooted a word? Because the other word that I want to say doesn't sound good at all, so I'm hoping troubleshooted is the word. But either way, this is a chronological or chronology or story. This is a story of the various issues I've had and how I've addressed those issues. If you've missed it, I did a full review of the Bambu P1S printer on my channel already. This is meant to be a complement for that. And the goal of this is a fewfold. First of all is it might be useful to you. If you find yourself the new owner of a Bambu P1S, you might find the things I've done to solve my issues, because I have solved my issues, you might find them relevant tidbits to store away for the future should you encounter those issues. Additionally, I think it's useful because it will give you a good sense of the kinds of issues I've had with the printer. Meaning I didn't want this to be the main focus of my review video because going through this is its own little saga. But I think it's worth, if you are considering being an owner of this not inexpensive printer, I mean you're looking at $850 for all of this if you get everything. There are cheaper options, you can get their cheaper printer, you don't need the AMS. There are other options, but if you do want all of this, this is not inexpensive. And so I think it's worth getting a sense of even just the story that I've gone through and what I had to do along the way. That's the goal of this video. So, my first 5 days with the Bambu P1S were golden. They were absolutely amazing. There were no issues whatsoever. Everything was incredible. Everything printed smoothly. It was an incredible experience considering the fact that my first experience with 3D printing was an Ender like 3 years ago. And while a good printer, I'm sure, it was a headache for me personally. This was an incredibly easy breezy experience to start with for 5 days. Then on day 5 or day 6, don't remember exactly, I got a failed print. Now, I don't know exactly what led to it. All I know is for the first time I experimented, meaning along the way, let me just go through a bit of my starting process. For the first 5 days, I used Bambu exclusive filaments for the first 2 or 3 days, but then already started experimenting with other filaments, 2 or 3 days in. Like, I already wanted to try other options, and so I tried other filaments that were not Bambu specific, and at first they worked fine. At first they worked fine for like, day 4 or 5, whatever you want to call it, working fine, no issues. But then, let's call it day 6, maybe day 5, whatever it was, let's call it day 6 though, just for the sake of a timeline here. I had a failed print, and the issue there was it was a stringed failed print. So effectively what I did is I printed something I had printed before, but this time around I duplicated it. So when you're printing things, you can just go into the slicer, which I did. I went to the slicer itself, I duplicated the thing, put 4 of them on a bed, and then started printing. I just wanted a little gizmo, and I wanted it 4 times. And unfortunately, I then suddenly heard, maybe 2 hours later, I heard some noises from upstairs. I went and checked the printer, and sure enough, things were being torn around and dragged around from a stringing issue, from a spaghetti issue, not stringing, from a spaghetti issue where effectively something had come loose and it was starting to just go everywhere. Now, I don't know what the source of this issue was. All I know is it was my first failed print. I chalked it up to, oh, hey, it looks like this printer's not perfect. That's fine. That's okay. No, not an issue for me at all. And then I continued with the next print. Now, the next print was I put back a Bambu filament print. I was using marble specifically. This is relevant to the story. So I was using a marble filament, and then I continued to print some other gizmo, specifically an earring holder for my daughter. I was printing the base of it. And at the end of the print, it just fails. Meaning effectively, I didn't get a spaghetti issue. It kind of printed the first, let's say it was 200 layers. It printed 180 layers, and then the last 20 layers just stopped printing. And I couldn't figure out exactly what it was, but the print clearly wasn't done. I wasn't sure if the model, I wasn't sure if it was the model at first. I went back, I looked at the model. No, there's supposed to be 20 more layers. It's not supposed to be with its weird cutoff. And from there, I figured out that there was a clogging issue in the nozzle, which I'd never experienced before. And I was like, oh, maybe these are related. Maybe the little spaghetti issue and the next failed print are related. To this day, I don't know if they are. I don't know the source of all the issues. I can just tell you the issues I've gone through and what I did along the way. So it's a clogging issue. That's fine. You can look into it. I did. I pulled up some YouTube videos, checked out some things. There are ways on the filament head, on the printer head, effectively the extruder head. There's a bunch of troubleshooting steps you can take to kind of remove things, take things apart in different levels of how much you need to take apart. And so I started doing that. I messed around with some videos on how to declog a printer head, and there's a bunch of things you could do, but you could remove the thing, you can pull out the pieces, you can do something called a cold pull, which is basically where you put a little needle, you put the little hex screw into it, you heat it up, you pull it in, you let it dry, and then you yank it out and it pulls out things. So I managed to do some things, basically heating up a hex screw and like pushing it through, ramming it through, using cold pulls to basically declog the head. it's some troubleshooting steps. You can find some videos on YouTube that will show you well how to do it, and I was able to do it, and it seemed to kind of work-ish. I went ahead and bought a declogger as well, 50 bucks on Amazon. It's an official tool that you can use for this kind of thing that will hopefully make your process a little easier. The steps you can do with the right tool, you can even do the steps without removing some of the bits. You can just do it straight from the thing. Either way, I haven't actually used the tool since because I've had I kind of solved my issues before that tool arrived, but I bought a declogger specifically to avoid this issue or to have a better tool for the job if it were to happen in the future. The problem is, while the declogger sort of seemed to solve my issue for a print or two, at this point, for the next 4 or 5 days, I consistently had off and on failed prints. So the issues continue to be intermittent, which is the worst part. It's impossible to troubleshoot intermittent parts. I declogged it, ran a print, it worked great. Then I ran another print and it didn't work great. Then I ran a print and it worked great. I ran another print and it didn't work great. And I couldn't figure out any sort of rhyme or reason as to why. I did keep on going through these declogging issues to try to see if those would solve anything, and unfortunately, no real luck. It just is inconsistent. Whatever seemed to be going on, maybe there's some filaments stuck in the head. To this day, again, I don't know fully. There might have been some filaments stuck in the head. I'm not certain. What I do know is the printer, the Bambu printer, comes with a replacement head, and I did eventually decide to just go ahead and replace the entire end, the 0.4 nozzle. I'm using a 0.4 nozzle the whole time. I tried going ahead and replacing it, and that seemed to mostly fix the issues, sort of. But we're not done yet because things still were going wrong. And again, the problem is, there were constantly changing variables going on throughout this process, which meant it was very hard to fully solve any issue. I can just tell you the kind of issues I had along the way. Now, swapping out the head did seem to have the biggest noticeable effect. So whatever was going on definitely decreased very heavily when I swapped out the head. So the point, basically, again, I swapped out the entire head. I wasn't sure because a few things could have been possible. Maybe this was related to me using non-Bambu filaments. That might have been the initial reason. I don't know. Maybe this was related to using marble filaments. I saw some things online that marble filaments can have some bits in it. That's what gives it the marble texture, and those bits can cause more issues with the clogging. So I also went ahead and got a reinforced steel nozzle at the same time, but so far I hadn't used that yet. I went ahead and got that so I can try to do that step as well. But in the meantime, I just replaced it with the default backup nozzle, so I was using a fresh extruder to just make sure there were no issues. Like, I still have my original one, haven't swapped back yet, although I did swap to the reinforced steel when I got that. But again, either way, it did start to get better once I swapped to that new nozzle, but it still wasn't consistently better. See, a few days later, another print continued to fail, and it started to fail again. And at this point, I was starting to get a little bit lost as far as the reasons. I had already looked into having the cover of the printer uncovered to let the heat from the printing escape so the PLA is not too effective. Specifically, when printing with PLA, you do want to have the top cover removed, and sometimes even the front door open as well. I shifted to using the front door open, and that didn't seem to do anything. I was mindful that the room I was printing in does not have central air. The room this printer was being stored in was it's an extension to my house, and it doesn't have central air. It has a ceiling fan, and this printer wasn't near the ceiling fan, and it is a room that could heat up a bit more. So I tried shifting the printer to another room, hoping that would possibly solve things. And I moved to another room, and it did seem to get a little better, but then I still had a failed print. Now, the tricky part is once I'd replaced the extruder head and prints seemed to get better, I did go back to experimenting with different filaments. This is the tricky part because I want to try to stabilize. Part of the troubleshooting process is you want to stabilize things, so I went back to using Bambu filaments, and I was still having issues before replacing the head. Once I replaced the head, I started to get better, and things were, again, ideally getting more consistent prints, but then I wanted to experiment again with non-standard Bambu filaments only. I didn't want to be locked to only using Bambu filaments ever. And so I tried other things, and that's why I started having those issues. And I couldn't figure out whether I was using, specifically for the record, I was using Sunlu filament. Sunlu, I actually have tried a few things. I've tried eSun Meta, which I don't think I'm going to go back to. I don't think I want to try that more. I want to kind of limit my types of filaments that I use. I've been using Sunlu PLA. I've been using Kingrun PLA and Elegoo PLA as different off-brand filaments. The eSun Meta is the one that I don't want to get back to. But I have used it. I'm trying to minimize my types. But either way, the Sunlu PLA was having issues. Specifically, was having a lot of issues with adhesion to the bed. And so I was trying to figure out whether switching to the new room would help. It seemed to help a little bit. I now have the full print door open, and again, I'm not sure how many of these issues are due to using a non-good filament, how many are due to the room temperature, how much of these issues are due to the marble print color, and whether that's the issue. I don't know what the source for these issues are. I'm just trying to get to a point where I can get back to having consistently good prints, where I don't have to rely on constantly checking to see when the next print failed. Which, again, this process may sound like it was very long. It wasn't. It was 4 to 5 days of excellent prints, 4 or so days of constantly trying to troubleshoot everything to fix it, and then from there 4 weeks straight of only one issue, which I will explain at the end of this video, because this is all an initial saga plus 1+ issue. But either way, what I did eventually manage to figure out is Sunlu PLA, at least for me, I was able to solve the issues by turning off the auxiliary fan, and these are settings I used as far as I went into the Bambu slicer, and I went ahead and changed settings on the filament. There's steps you can look at as far as how to do that, but effectively you can set print profiles for different filaments. And what from looking at a lot of research online, I found that the Sunlu specifically, I went with a 75-degree heated bed. I also started using a cool plate, I should say that. I went with a 75-degree heated bed that then shifts to 65 degrees after the first layer, and then turns off the auxiliary cooling fan. And since then, I've had no issues with, almost no issues with anything. I say almost, we're going to come back to some of the stuff I've experienced, but I went to mostly almost no issues with anything else I've printed since then, and it's been a streamlined process. And again, for me, the troubleshooting steps were several things. I switched out the entire nozzle to begin with to the replacement nozzle. I then replaced that nozzle with a reinforced steel nozzle. I switched to a room that does have central air, but not specifically where everything's blowing, because you don't want cold air blowing and stuff. You just want a central air. You don't want the room heating up too much and being whatever. Although again, I've seen people using Bambu printers in 90-degree weather and who knows what. There's a lot of different experiences you can have. I'm just telling you the experiences I've had. One thing I did along the way that I didn't really heavily focus on is I also bought a filament dryer in order to avoid any and all issues. I wanted to have no possibility of any issues, so I bought a filament dryer and started drying my filaments before using them to remove any negative variables that I possibly could in any way. And altogether, these issues did seem to help. And then again, with the Sunlu PLA, messing around with the print settings has certainly helped. So overall, everything. Oh, I didn't even talk about the soap yet. Another issue I tried experimenting with is the adhesion on the plates. Because in general, why something doesn't stick to a plate can be a variety of several factors, from the filament itself to the environment you're in, to the plates, to possibly glue and different things. Now, I didn't experiment with glue at this point, but I did buy some glue, so I would have that option to me. What I did is I did work on cleaning my build plate. And this is where you'll find conflicting things on the internet, whether you should use isopropyl alcohol to clean your build plate, or whether you should just use warm water and soap to clean your build plate. For me, one of the things I did try doing is I tried using isopropyl alcohol, which some people say online to use. And then the experience I personally had is when I did that, I found that I got worse adhesion on my build plate. And I since found some people who've had a similar experience. As much as many people will talk about how isopropyl alcohol is good for them and will help clean your build plate, for me, I experienced more issues when I used it. And since then, I've resorted to just using warm water and soap to clean my build plate. And that has been the thing that has been most consistent for me. Warm water and soap, and then letting it out to dry. You know, you could just wash it off and just let it dry for a bit. Maybe you have a replacement build plate. Maybe you don't print for a few hours. Whatever it is, just let it completely dry before going back to, it. And you want to clean your build plates. And it'll tell you different numbers. For myself, I've been printing it pretty consistently with this printer, and I'm cleaning the build plate like once every 2 weeks. That's roughly what I'm doing. I find you can get a lot of printing without having a lot of issues. As far as the issues I've experienced since then, because I have experienced some issues since then. The issues I've experienced are certain types of prints will still have adhesion issues. I do find this is print specific, meaning I don't think this is a general printer issue anymore. I find certain difficult prints, often those that have less surface contact with the bed, will have some degree of issues. Smaller pieces will have issues, and for those I found that generally, if I really have a hard time messing with settings, then I find what does work is the Magigoo PLA. Magigoo glue stick will work well for making sure everything sticks. I don't like the cleanup and the mess up around it, so I try to use it infrequently. When I'm having a particularly difficult print, I do find it usable. The other issue I did run into, and I ran into this a few days ago, is when switching filaments from one roll to another. The AMS has an automatic feature. If you have two filaments that are the same type and you runs out of one, it'll proxy to the other one if it's the same type of everything, same manufacturer, same profile, same color. Basically says, hey, this is a replacement filament, which is great. That's a good feature. The problem is when doing that once, I've had that work generally well, but one time when I was doing that, instead the printer head had an issue where it wouldn't pull back the filament properly, and so I had filaments stuck from the AMS to the printer that wasn't retracting properly. To that end, I found a YouTube video which basically walks through how to disconnect your wires at each step behind the printer and then slowly disconnect the filament that's in the way. It's a bit of a process. It took me like 6-7 minutes, but it was a process that successfully I was able to do on the first try and then went back to having no real issues. So that's kind of meant to give you the saga I had. As far as the feelings of this was a very, now I'm past it, so it's easy. But effectively, I had this very expensive printer on my table that was suddenly experiencing issues when the entire pitch point of this printer is that you don't get the issues. This is a more expensive printer, but you don't have to troubleshoot all these things. And I did have to troubleshoot these things. I did have to figure things out. I did have to watch videos on how to disassemble the extruder head and reassemble things. I was doing all this kind of hands-on stuff, which for me, I don't mind as long as the end result is good, which it was. But if you are looking for a printer that's going to guarantee you that you don't have to do anything, this can't do that. This, again, I covered this in my review. I love this printer. I am having so much fun with printing things, both for board games and for other things and accessories and who knows what. I'm having a lot of fun with what this printer can do and just the joy of being able to print toys or things you enjoy. It's a fun thing to own, but it's not something that comes with no pain points. There were pain points along the way, and I had to go through a bunch of troubleshooting steps, and to this day, I don't know what solved my issues. I know that the issues were likely caused either by using some non-Bambu filament and it causing an issue. I don't know why. Perhaps using the marble filament caused the issue. I don't know, because again, I had 5 days straight of no issues at all before the issue started. And then since then, it's been a combination of getting a new build plate for better adhesion, switching the room, hoping that's not the issue, switching with the settings of the actual temperature depending on the PLA you're using, messing around with dryers, using dryers to go ahead and dry your filaments beforehand. There were a variety of things I did. Switching out the entire extruder head to reinforced steel to better deal with whatever's coming your way. Although again, switching to the regular head seemed to improve as well. So I think I just had a head that got clogged and I couldn't properly clean it. But all of these things are steps that I had to go through to be able to get to a point where I printed cleanly. So if, again, the end result here is a printer that works well, a printer that works great, and a printer that I'm very, very happy with and has been nearly non-stop printing for 5 weeks now. But it is still something that you, in my opinion, have to be willing to get your hands dirty, check out a few videos, do your research, and sometimes look at conflicting pieces of information and make the best out of it to try to get to an endpoint to try to solve whatever problems you have. That said, Bambu support will also be there for you. I find the internets and the forums are usually the best starting point, but if you need to, Bambu support can also take care of you and help you out with various issues. And in some cases, you want to be careful about doing too much troubleshooting so you don't void any warranties or whatnot. You don't want to necessarily take apart things that you shouldn't take apart if it starts getting to that level. Anyways, I hope you found that in some degree helpful, either to give you an idea of the experience I had to help you know whether you're willing to sign up for the risk of that experience, or even to actually give you practical solutions to any issues you might uncover along the way. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.